Throughout the story of Yu Yu Hakusho, the main protagonist Yusuke Urameshi and his friends encountered a number of powerful and dangerous villains. Being comprised of humans and demons alike, these villains provided an incredible challenge and left an indelible impression on Yusuke as a person. But who among them is the best and most iconic villain? On the newest episode of Chapter Chat, we're going to discuss that. Make sure to subscribe to this channel and enable notifications so you can see all of my content right away when it comes out. Okay guys, so joining me in this video is someone you've seen on my videos in the past. His name is...
Alrighty guys, it is Quaman here today.
So, I think it makes sense for this video for us to go through chronologically, in the order in which Yusuke encountered these villains. So let's first start off with the group of 3 villains that Yusuke encounters in the Spirit Detective arc, which would be the group of Kurama, Hiei, and Goki. And I think in their case I would have to say that even though he wasn't technically the leader, he was basically the real true antagonist out of the 3, as the character of Goki kind of served more as a stepping stone for Yusuke to flex his power with the spirit gun and the spirit cufflink, and as well as Kurama in this case wasn't really someone who was truly trying to stop Yusuke or even keep the items for himself. He just wanted to use it to save his mother, who was on the verge of death.
This was a very interesting group because outside of Goki, 2 of those characters ended up being allies to the rest of the show. But I mean, Kurama definitely didn't feel like a villain at all. It felt like he had his own individual agenda to help his mother. So his part of the whole equation doesn't really need to be discussed. In the case of Goki, I got the vibe that he was like a low-level villain that was very forgettable. And honestly, like they never even showed anything about him in the future moving forward. So obviously we don't care about his whereabouts. We don't care about anything that happened to his character. Hiei, on the other hand, I feel like really brought that arc to life because it was kind of like his rivalry with Yusuke was being established early that we would see later on when they went to go take on the 4 Saint Beasts. And I also think that because Hiei brought Keiko into the equation when he was trying to possess and take her over, you know, with his Jaganai, I definitely feel like that demonic manipulation was something that made him and Yusuke kind of always on the fence, and we would see their relationship mature later on. So in reality, I wouldn't really say any of them really felt like villains except for Hiei.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. And Hiei definitely had a lasting impact on the series, like you said, becoming an ally. Now moving on to the next real main villain of this arc, and it's funny because this arc is really split up into 4 mini arcs. The next one would have to be the main antagonist of the Genkai tournament, which was Rando, who was a demon that was also a martial arts master who had stolen 99 different techniques during his fights against the various martial artists that he killed in order to become this ultimate fighter. And that was the whole reason why he was even in the Genkai tournament, because he wanted to acquire the Spirit Wave technique from Genkai so that he could make himself even more powerful and a threat to even stronger foes.
Honestly, it's just the funny thing to me is that whenever you look at Yu Yu Hakusho back in hindsight, and recently I saw the series again about 3 weeks ago, I really feel like as the show progresses, that along with combined with the 4 Saint Beasts, except for a few of them, they really became forgettable characters. So no, I wouldn't really say that he felt like a villain in the long term, but at the time, because Yusuke was developing his abilities and each villain was progressively getting stronger, I would say so.
Yeah, I agree, which leads into what we were talking about earlier, which would have to be the 4 Saint Beasts. And when it comes down to them, their main leader was Suzaku, who was a demon that had a lot of really powerful abilities, even though his power level might not really be comparative to people that came after him. But this guy not only proved a big threat to the Earth as a whole with the spreading of the Makai insects, but also was a massive threat to Yusuke himself and pushed him really to his absolute limits and beyond, to where he nearly died having to defeat this guy.
Suzaku was by far the most memorable character from that arc because he was obviously the main villain of the 4 Saint Beasts. And I feel like because that was like really the first time that we truly saw Yusuke bringing out like his true power, you know, combined with the fact that this villain kind of had a large arc where like he was sending all of those possessed like humans after Keiko and Botan, I feel like that arc by itself really epitomized, like, okay, this kid Yusuke has a lot of potential. And that was like the first real serious villain that Yusuke had to fight. And what I loved about that fight is seeing how Yusuke improvised and just improved so progressively from just being a regular high school punk.
And one of the things that really also built him up as a villain would have to be the fact that this arc takes place immediately after Yusuke comes back from finishing his training with Genkai. So that really shows you that things are on a whole different level now. But they get taken to an even higher level, much higher than we would have expected, with the next villain, who was first introduced at the very end of the Spirit Detective arc, but then became the true villain and the true main antagonist of the Dark Tournament arc. And that would have to be Toguro. And definitely when it comes down to Toguro, I would have to say that he's my personal favorite villain in the entire franchise, and very arguable for the most iconic. Obviously Toguro, when we take a look at him, he seems to be very inspired in his imagery by a certain Austrian bodybuilder who I'm a big fan of. And when we actually see him on display in the series itself, we really see that he takes the dynamics that were established up until this point, and he turns everything up to 11, taking it to the very next extreme, where he starts to implement things that we saw very similarly with Goku versus Frieza on Namek, where he shows up and he's like, oh, I've been holding back my power the entire time. You know, when he encounters Yusuke in the parking garage, and then he says, I can use 10% of my power, I could use 20, 30, 40, and we see him get more and more grotesquely muscular as this happens. So I feel like with Toguro, not only does he obviously have the incredible power on his side and the intimidation factor, but he's actually a lot more nuanced of a character than he would first appear in his introduction.
I feel like one of the best scenes in Yu Yu Hakusho history would have to be that scene like right after that whole arc ended, where like Toguro like encounters Yusuke in the city and then starts breaking down that building. You remember that scene, Mike, where like he starts like making it crumble, and he did it to like get Yusuke's attention to like join the Dark Tournament. And I feel like that was obviously a fantastic way to begin an arc and really progress it. In terms of Toguro and both the Elder Toguro, I would definitely have to say that that arc did a fantastic job in teasing us when it pertains to how Yusuke and Kuwabara came up into attacking them, and I definitely feel like Toguro was the first villain in Yu Yu Hakusho that really had like his own motives and his own agenda, whereas the other villains before had minor agendas or kind of just existed. Like Suzaku, for example, Mike. Suzaku was kind of just doing his own thing in his place. Like, he wasn't really interfering with Yusuke until he tried to hurt Keiko. He was kind of just worrying and doing his own business, and, you know, Yusuke was assigned to take him out, but he didn't have, like, a personal agenda the way that Toguro did. And you can even argue that for all Yu Yu Hakusho villains, Toguro is the most personable villain of all.
And one of the things I always really liked about the Dark Tournament and his relationship with Yusuke and Genkai is almost kind of like the whole parentage sort of role that each of them fill. Like, Genkai kind of serving as a mother for Yusuke, who actually had a mother who was kind of absentee. When it came to his actual father, he was never there for Yusuke. So Toguro, even though he's a villain who wants to kill Yusuke and is pushing him to these extremes to defeat him, still kind of serves like as a father, which Genkai references when they meet one another before Toguro goes to his final destination, the afterlife. But moving on to the next main villain on this list is someone else who also is a very strong contender for the title of the best main antagonist, which would have to be Shinobu Sensui, or the Dark Angel as he's referred to. And you know, when it comes to layered villains, and when it comes to a character who has their own motives, I think that Sensui is certainly one of the top tier, not only in this franchise, but perhaps among general anime villains. And the way that he's implemented from the very beginning, he isn't necessarily shown as being as powerful as Yusuke or Toguro in the Dark Tournament, but the way that he uses his skills, such as his special martial arts style to counter all of Yusuke's moves, and he's always keeping him on the offensive. But Sensui is always steps ahead of Yusuke and kind of distracting him with his various territory users while he's trying to enact the true plan of opening up the Kakai barrier between the demon world and the living.
I would say that where we mentioned before that Toguro felt like a very personal villain, where in terms of the relationship he had not just with Yusuke but with Genkai. I mean, where Toguro was a personable villain, I would say Sensui was probably the villain in Yu Yu Hakusho that had the biggest agenda and the biggest plan. Because if you really think about it, like out of all the Yu Yu Hakusho villains, there was never one that had an agenda to the likes of Sensui. And I think because he was a former spirit detective, and I think because he was a human just like Yusuke, I feel like that made him what he was as a villain. And obviously he brought out a very, very, very different side of Yusuke when Raizen possessed his body and took him over. So for all of that stuff, I feel like really exploring the human versus demon world was brought about when Sensui was introduced to the series.
And I think that with Sensui, the concept of him is also really interesting when it comes to showcasing what could happen if someone like Yusuke were to fall. If they allowed the past traumas of the world, such as what was on the chapter Black Tape, to influence them and push them in the direction of nihilism and wanting everything to come to an end. And we even saw that when his mind fractured into 7, very akin to the 7 deadly sins. However, when it comes to the actual execution of how that was revealed and kind of like the final fight between him and Yusuke, I always felt that was a little bit lacking, and something that for me is kind of a negative when it comes to him being the truly most iconic and best villain in the series, but nonetheless I would still put him above most of the villains that came before him. And then moving on next to the final arc of the series, which would be the Three Kings arc, we encounter the Three Kings themselves. And among these three, I feel like Yomi would probably have to be the true main antagonist of this arc, because like you said, with Sensui and his master plan, it's also revealed that Yomi kind of has his own master plan, in which he wants to not only take over the demon world, but then he wants to go to spirit world and take that over as well, and basically become the God Emperor, and taking that top throne for himself.
If you really think about it, I mean, you could say that there really is no good guy in that arc, because Raizen did, I guess you could say, a somewhat honorable thing by starving himself from eating humans, which I always felt was stupid in concept, but I could understand the impact that that human woman had on him. Obviously, Yusuke's great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, you know, for him to decide in doing that. In terms of Mokoro, she came from such a very dark background, and for anybody who has read the manga, like, the manga really goes more in depth about what actually happened to her as opposed to what the anime hints at, you know what I'm saying? And then in terms of Yomi, I feel like Yomi probably had the closest thing to like a very aggressive agenda to try and take over the demon world, whereas the other two demons, they kind of just felt like, okay, I'm associated with Yusuke and I'm associated with Hiei for my personal reasons, not because I really want to do this, you know what I'm saying? And that's the vibe I got from that arc. Yomi felt like the center focus, and Mokoro and Raizen just seemed like, I want to be with Hiei and I want to be with Yusuke.
You know, I think when it comes down to it, a lot of what we could have seen from these characters, these antagonists, really could have been amplified that much more if Togashi had truly been able to put his all into this arc like he originally intended, such as having an all-out war between the various characters, as well as between the demon world, the spirit world, and the humans, and really take everything to the next level. But as we know, this ended up being the shortest arc, and a lot of that came down to his own health and everything at the time. So I feel like this arc and the characters in it, even though I really like the character development and a lot of the concepts, I feel like is really a case of wasted potential to a degree, and also that it's something that could have been even better, and maybe in that case Yomi or Mokoro or even Raizen could have taken this spot. So with all of that being said, and with us having gone through each of the main antagonists, in your opinion, who do you believe is truly the best main antagonist in the Yu Yu Hakusho franchise?
Very good question. In theory, Sensui. In execution, Toguro. In terms of concept, I would say that Sensui is the best villain, has the best motive, has probably some of the most unique abilities, and I feel like his agenda really made him the best villain. But I think in terms of how they executed relationships and how the villain was actually used, I would say Toguro.
Yeah, I have to completely agree with you. You know, when it comes down to Sensui, like I said, if certain things were tweaked and like the ending climax of the arc was a little bit better, then for me, I feel like he definitely could have been the number one on this list. However, for me, Toguro is my favorite, and one of the reasons he's my favorite is because not only does he take this super badass, imposing shonen villain to the next level, but then he also has a really personal relationship with our main protagonist and is a far more dynamic character than you would expect. So for me, I would have to say that Toguro has to be the best main villain in Yu Yu Hakusho. Alright guys, so who do you think is the best main villain in Yu Yu Hakusho? Let us know down below. Of course, make sure to check out Quaman's channel in the end screen and the description. And if you're new to this channel, then don't forget to subscribe and enable notifications so that you can see all of my videos right away when they come out. And make sure to stick around, because there's a lot more to come in the future.
Yeah, and you better subscribe.